Coastal defense ships were warships built for the purpose of coastal defense, mostly during the period from 1860 to 1920. They were small, often cruiser-sized warships that sacrificed speed and range for armor and armament. They were usually attractive to nations that either could not afford full-sized battleships or could be satisfied by specially designed shallow draft vessels capable of littoral operations close to their own shores. The Nordic countries and Thailand found them particularly appropriate for their island-dotted coastal waters. Some vessels had limited blue water capabilities, others operated in rivers. The coastal defense ships differed from earlier monitors by having a higher freeboard and usually possessing both higher speed and a secondary armament. Some examples also mounted casemated guns. They varied in size from around 1,500 tons to 8,000 tons. Their construction and appearance was often that of miniaturized pre-dreadnought battleships. As such, they carried heavier armor than cruisers or gunboats of equivalent size, were typically equipped with a main armament of 2 or 4 heavy and several lighter guns in turrets or casements, and could steam at a higher speed than most monitors. In service they were mainly used as movable coastal artillery rather than instruments of sea control or fleet engagements like the battleships operated by blue water navies. Few of these ships saw combat in the First World War, though some did in the Second World War. The last were scrapped in the 1970s. Navies with coastal defense ships serving as their main capital ships included those of Belgium, Ecuador, Finland, Greece, the Netherlands, Norway, Portugal, Sweden, Thailand, and the British colonies of India and Victoria. Some nations which at one time or another built, bought, or otherwise acquired their own frontline capital ships, such as Argentina, Austria-Hungary, Brazil, China, Germany, Russia, and Spain, also deployed this type of warship, with Russia using 3 at the Battle of Tsushima in 1905. Apart from specially built coastal defense ships, some navies used obsolescent pre-dreadnought battleships in this role. The Royal Navy deployed 4 Majestic-class battleships as guardships in the Humber at the start of the First World War. Similarly, the U.S. Navy redesignated the Indiana and Iowa classes as coast defense battleships in 1919. Such ships tended to be near the end of their service lives and while generally considered no longer fit for frontline service, they were still powerful enough for defensive duties in reserve situations. Categorization. This type of vessel has always been categorized differently by different countries, due to treaties, differences in judgments related to design or intended roles, and also national pride. In the United Kingdom, the Scandinavian ships were known as coast defense ships. The Germans called these ships Küstenpanzerschiff. The Danes referred to their ships as Kystforsvarsskib and Panzerskib. In Norway they were referred to as Panzerskip. The Dutch called their ships cruiser, Panzership, or Slagship. The Swedish term for these ships was initially a class Pansarbat and later Panzerskep. Note, however, that the German Panzerschiff and of the Deutschland-class pocket battleships are not coast defense ships. As an example of the profusion of terms and classifications which often contradicted each other, the 1938 edition of Jane's Fighting Ships lists the Swedish Pansarskeps of the Sverige class as battleships. The Swedish Panzerskep. The Swedish Panzerskep were an outgrowth of the earlier Swedish adoption of the monitor and were used for similar duties. Technical details. The Panzerskep, with the notable exception of the Sverige class, were relatively small vessels with limited speed, shallow draft, and very heavy guns relative to the displacement. They were designed for close inshore work in the littoral zone of Scandinavia, and other countries with shallow coastal waters. The aim was to outgun any ocean-going warship of the same draft by a significant margin, making it a very dangerous opponent for a cruiser, and deadly to anything smaller. The limitations in speed and seaworthiness were a trade-off for the heavy armament carried. Effectiveness. The Spherier-class ships differed in several ways from the classical coastal defense ship, having heavier armament as well as better speed and armor. The main difference was to be noted in their tactical doctrine and operations. Unlike other coastal defense ships, the Spherier-class formed the core of a traditional open-sea battle group, operating with cruisers, destroyers, torpedo boats, and air reconnaissance in conformance with traditional battleship tactics of the time. This mini-battle group had no intention of challenging the superpowers in blue water battles, but rather were to operate as a defensive shield to aggression challenging Swedish interests and territory, based on the doctrine that one needs a battle group to challenge other battle groups. This force intended to form a problematic obstacle in the confined and shallow Baltic and Kattegat theater. It has been suggested that the Spherier-class ships were one reason why Germany did not invade Sweden during World War II. Such speculation appeared in Warship Magazine Annual 1992 in the article, The Spherier-class Coastal Defense Ships, by Daniel G. Harris. This could be said to have been partly confirmed in the post-war publication of German tactical orders, and of scenarios regarding attacking Sweden. The problems of maintaining an army in Sweden without sea superiority were emphasized, and the lack of available suitable units to face the Swedish Navy was pointed out. Summarizing the question of effectiveness for the Spherier class, it is likely that despite a good armament they would have been too small, slow, and cramped, along with having insufficient range, to perform adequately against any traditional battle cruiser or battleship in a blue water scenario. However, if correctly used in their home waters and in a defensive situation, they would probably have presented a major challenge for any aggressor. The Dutch Panzerschepen. The Dutch used their armoured ships mainly to defend their interests overseas, in particular their colonial possessions in the West Indies and the East Indies. For this reason the ships had to be capable of long-range cruising, providing artillery support during amphibious operations, and carrying the troops and equipment needed in these operations. At the same time, the ships had to be armed and armored well enough to face contemporary armored cruisers of the Imperial Japanese Navy, and as such they were expected to act as mini-battleships rather than strictly as coastal defense vessels. The last Dutch Panzership, HNLMS de Zeven Provinciën, was built in 1909 as a stopgap measure while the Dutch Admiralty and government contemplated an ambitious fleet plan comprising a number of dreadnought battleships. This ambition was never realized due to the outbreak of the First World War. The Second World War put an end to a similar project to obtain fast capital ships in the late 1930s with German assistance. Prior to the Second World War, the Dutch had relegated all the surviving Panzerships to secondary duties. The Axis powers, who seized some of the ships following the conquest of the Netherlands, converted several to serve as floating anti-aircraft batteries and subsequently utilized some as block ships. Operators. The navies of the following countries have operated coastal defense ships at some point in time: Argentina, El Plata class, El Plata Los Andes Libertad class, Independencia Libertad; Austria-Hungary, Kronprinz class SMS Kronprinzessin Erzherzogen Stephanie SMS Kronprinz Erzherzog Rudolf Monarch class SMS Monarch SMS Wien SMS Budapest, Brazil, Barroso Brazil, Lima Barros, Rio de Janeiro, Bahia, Salvador, Marizzi Barros class, Marizzi Barros, Herval Cabral class, Cabral Colombo, Set de Setembro, Javari class, Javari Solomos, Marshal Deodora class, Marshal Deodora, Marshal Floriano, China, Ping Yuan, Denmark, Herluftroll class, Herluftroll Olfit Fisher Pederskram Niels Duel, Finland, Vanamoinen class Panzeraliver ships Ilmarinen Vanamoinen, France, Gemapes class 6,476 tons, Gemapes, Hult 1911, Valmy, Stricken 1911, Bouvines class 6,681 tons, Admiral Trey Hewitt, stricken 1922. Buvines, stricken 1920. Germany. Oldenburg Siegfried class Siegfried Beowulf Frithjof Hagen Heimdall Hildebrand Odin class Odiniger. The Netherlands. Evertsen class HNLMS Evertsen HNLMS Piet Hein HNLMS Kortener Koningen Regentis class HNLMS Koningen Regentis HNLMS De Ruyter HNLMS Hartog Hendrik HNLMS Martin Harpert Zoontromp HNLMS Jacob van Heemskerk HNLMS De Zeven Provinciën, Norway. Tordenskjold class HNOMS Tordenskjold HNOMS Harold Halfager Eidsvold class HNOMS Eidsvold HNOMS Norgebjorgven class. Both ships were requisitioned by the Royal Navy during World War I while under construction, completed and served as the monitors HMS Glatin and HMS Gorgon HNOMS Bjordvan HNOMS Nidaris. Portugal. Vasco da Gama. Russia. Uragan class Novgorod class, later reclassified as coastal defense armor-clad ships. Novgorod Rear Admiral Popov Admiral Ushakov class Admiral Ushakov Admiral Senior Veen General Admiral Graf Apraxin. Sweden. SVEA class SVEA Gota Thule Odin class Odin Thornjord Dristjatanerin class Erin Wasser Tapahetan Manliatan Oscar II Sverige class Sverige. Gustav V Drottning Victoria. Thailand. Ratanarkosine class Ratanarkosine Sukhoi Thornberry class HTMS Shri Udr HTMS Thornberry. India. Cerberus class Magdala Abyssinia. British colony of Victoria. Cerberus class HMVS Cerberus.